I'm Sebastian Musgrave, and this is Victoria's Legacy. Good evening, Miss Nightingale.
Good evening, sir.
Henry Wadsworth Longfellow once wrote of you, and I quote, "In that house of misery, a lady with a lamp I see, pass through the glimmering gloom, and flit from room to room." Could you elaborate, or rather enlighten us, Miss Nightingale, as to the nature of this house of misery and your intriguing activities with the lamp?
Well, yes, of course. Well, this first came to prominence whilst I was serving as a supervisor and a trainer of nurses during the Crimean War in a military hospital in Sanitary, Constantinople. The injured soldiers were dying of infectious disease like typhoid and cholera, in appalling conditions. We worked through the night, ministering to patient after patient, providing care, compassion and comfort. I walked through the corridors, in the dark corridors, holding a lamp. And the soldiers very endearingly referred to me as the Angel of Crimea, the lady with the lamp. You see, to them, I was a spiritual beacon of care and compassion after all they'd been through.
I see.
Much to my dismay, a portrait of myself carrying a lamp appeared in the London Illustrated News.
Yes.
And quickly I was followed by an army of followers.
How came you to be there? I mean, in Crimea in the first place?
Well, when the Crimean War broke out, thousands of British soldiers were sent to the Black Sea, and after the Battle of Alma, well, you'll have read about it in the newspapers, where they reported from the front line.
Indeed.
The horrendous conditions that the soldiers were injured, in appalling conditions. The country was in uproar, how the soldiers were being neglected in unsanitary and inhumane conditions. I received a letter from the then Secretary of State, Sir Sidney Hubert. He was a friend of mine, and he did ask me to put together a corps of nurses to go over to the military hospitals in Sanitary, which I did. Do you know, it was the first time that women were officially allowed to serve in the army.
Really? When you arrived at Sanitary, I believe it was 1854, how did you find the conditions there?
Well, we heard about the conditions beforehand, but nothing prepared us for what we were met with. Soldiers were lying in their own excrement, on stretchers throughout the hallways. Rodents and bugs scurried past them. There was a rancid smell in the air that just hung. Well, we quickly set about scrubbing the hospital with scrubbing brushes from floor to ceiling. Even able soldiers were instructed to help, and we ensured that all the patients were properly clothed and fed. Yes, and supplies were diminishing, bandages and soap. Yes, we even had to ration the water.
Extraordinary. I believe you were instrumental there with regard to your sanitary improvements in effecting a dramatic reduction in the loss of life. However did you achieve this?
Well, our best efforts failed to reduce the death toll, I'm afraid. It was relentless. There was over 4,000 fatalities that winter. You know, our best efforts to improve the efficiency of the hospital helped, but it was very much a deadly place. And so the government sent over the Sanitary Commission to investigate the conditions of the hospital.
Ah, yes.
What they uncovered was shocking. The hospital was actually built on a cesspool, a sewer. The water was contaminated, and so was the hospital itself. Soldiers were drinking contaminated water. So it was all flushed out and ventilated, and consequently we saw a decrease in fatalities.
I see. Yes. That must have been much appreciated by the soldiers and indeed by the British Army at the time. You are to be congratulated, madam. Now, I'm very interested in exploring your post-war experience. It's well known, for instance, that you've been nothing short of prolific in a number of different avenues. But first, I wonder, Miss Nightingale, if you could say a little about what first drew you to your vocation.
Well, I grew up with my sister Parthay in Lea Hurst in Derbyshire, a country estate which my father had inherited. And as we developed into young ladies, I was pretty active in ministering to the poor and the ill in the neighbouring village. At the age of 16, I realised that my calling was in nursing. My parents, of course, thought otherwise, and we were sent off to Europe, to their favourite haunts. This was normal practice at the time, to send gentlewomen over to be educated and refined. But of course, I had a dream. I had a dream that God came to me and called me to his service. I had a mission in life, and that mission was nursing. When I told my parents about my ambition to be a nurse, oh, they were horrified. They forbade me to pursue any form of nursing. It was unheard of, they said, for a young lady of the upper classes, social standing. Oh no, I was to meet a man of means and marry. I wasn't to take a job of lowly menial labour like a nurse. I did have a long courtship, and I refused an offer, a proposal of marriage from a very suitable gentleman. While he stimulated me intellectually and romantically, I was never quite what I desired. I realised I had more to offer in life, and I was not going to find it in a life of domesticity. I continued to visit hospitals in Rome, Paris and London, and when Papa eventually realised that I wasn't unlikely to marry, he allowed me to enrol as a nursing student in a hospital in Germany.
And the rest, as they say, is history. And now, following the Crimea, excuse me, you played a prominent role in improving public health, both here and abroad, particularly in India, I believe. What led you to this? And what would you say has been the impact of your intervention here?
Well, when I returned home after the conflict was resolved, I was met by a hero's welcome, which was quite a surprise and something I wanted to avoid. You see, I was just a humble nurse. This was my mission in life to nurse, and I was haunted by the loss of all those soldiers. I found it very difficult to travel about, so I went under a pseudonym, Miss Smythe. It was the only way I could hide away from people. But based on my observations in the Crimea, I wrote notes on the matters affecting the health and efficiency and the administration of the hospital in the army. I used all my experience that I had in the Crimea to improve sanitation in other hospitals that were suffering in poor conditions. I was very fortunate to meet Queen Victoria. She presented me with an engraved brooch. She was very supportive of my work, and the notes sparked actually a complete restructure of the War Office administration departments. She also worked with me to persuade the government to set up a new commission, the Royal Health Commission for the British Army. Yes, it was wondrous actually, a wondrous time, and I was able to work with mathematicians and to use all the data that we collected, complex data from the army. And what we discovered was actually shocking. Of the 16,000 of the 18,000 soldiers that died, the death wasn't from battle wounds, it was from preventative diseases.
Preventative diseases?
Spread by poor conditions.
Oh, I see. Yeah, sanitation.
Yes. So I continued to work with the British Army in India. Again, uncontaminated water, trying to improve this for the people of India. I continue to collect data, and I will campaign and continue to campaign with famine relief and to improve sanitary conditions for the people of India. Not very well these days and unable to travel. I've never been to India, but I receive reports and I log and analyse all the work.
A very honourable endeavour, Miss Nightingale. Now, you mentioned data and information. I believe you have an enduring interest in the field of statistics and in the visual presentation of information. I wonder, for the benefit of those less acquainted with this area, if you might say a little about it and its importance.
Well, from a very early age, I had a love of collecting information and recording. I also had a fascination and appreciation of seashells. I had an exhaustive collection of seashells, which I used to record and list on tables. I spent hours drawing them to perfection. And even when I travelled through Europe, I often disappeared and was found recording information about the population or the hospital or charitable institutions. So I've always had this love for mathematics, and I'd use the findings that we had from the Crimea data. In fact, it was a revelation, and we had to communicate this to the public. How to do it. I didn't want to do it on complicated lists and tables, so I came up with a diagram for the causes of mortality and to translate it. It was a visual format, a rose diagram.
A rose diagram?
Yes, which showed the fatalities decreased once we had the intervention from the Sanitary Commission. well, it was widely published and used and understood by everybody because it was a simple format. And it continued to improve sanitary conditions in hospitals and healthcare for everyone.
And I'm sure it still continues to do so. Now, you have been quoted in the field of statistics as saying, and once again, I quote, "To understand God's thoughts, one must study statistics, for these are the measure of his purpose." In what way are his thoughts manifest in statistics, I wonder?
Well, statistics is a collection and analysis of an interpretation, presentation, and a trust in a conclusion. And it's the same with God. I feel it's a belief in God that the spiritual truths can be known through an individual insight rather than through study or reasoning. You see, we're all given gifts from the Holy Spirit, and it's incumbent of us to use those gifts. We don't know why God makes things happen. We've no insight into his wisdom, but we have to trust in God.
Yes, I see. It is clear, Miss Nightingale, to anyone who would care to cast a glance over your life and your career, that you have been an extraordinarily busy and productive lady. I believe your current focus is in literature, is it not?
Well, yes, of course. As you know, I developed chronic Crimean fever. It's a sickness that results from tick bites, a very nasty sickness, which renders one disabled. But, you know, this hasn't faded my ambition. On the contrary, in particular now, I'm able to write more, and I spend my time writing. I still collect data, but I've been writing nursing publications, and later I went on to write novels for the public to read. But one of my greatest achievements, of course, is the funding and the establishment of St Thomas's Hospital in London and the Nightingale training for nurses unit. You see, at one time, nursing was looked down upon by the upper classes, but now it's revered as a vocation. Even ladies from the wealthy upper classes are enrolling at my training school, eager to follow my example. Well, when I'm no longer a memory or just a name, I do hope that my voice perpetuates my life's work, and I will continue to be a spiritual beacon of light for love, care, and compassion.
And I'm sure you will be, dear lady. Miss Florence Nightingale, I thank you sincerely for taking part in this series of Victoria's